That was the night everything shifted. I had spent weeks preparing a special anniversary surprise for my wife, something from my heart, a gift that symbolized both the sacrifices I'd made and the love I still felt for her after all these years. But when she opened it, her reaction wasn't joy, wasn't gratitude. It was disappointment. Her exact words were, "That's it?" And what stunned me even more was how her friend, sitting across the table, whispered words that burned themselves into my memory. "I'd be grateful." That single moment cracked open the life I thought I had, and it forced me to confront everything I had been ignoring for too long. This is the story of how one gift, one reaction, and one unexpected voice changed the course of my marriage forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. When I think back to who I was before that night, I realize how much of my identity had been wrapped around trying to keep things together, trying to play the role of the good husband who provided, who showed up, who made sacrifices, even when no one else noticed. My name is Daniel, and for nearly a decade I had been married to a woman I believed was the love of my life, Camille. We met in our 20s at a small university library, where she asked me if I knew where the history section was. I remember laughing nervously as I walked her over to the shelf, trying to act casual even though my hands were shaking. She had this quiet confidence, a kind of presence, that pulled people in. I was hooked from the start, and I think a part of me still believed that same magic existed, even years later when things had grown strained and distant between us. But before I jump too far into the unraveling, let me show you what life looked like in the beginning, because without that picture you won't understand the weight of what came later. Camille and I were not a glamorous couple. We didn't have much money starting out. I was working at a mid-level accounting firm, barely scraping by with late nights and weekend shifts, while she pursued a degree in interior design. We rented a tiny apartment with peeling paint and noisy neighbors, but we loved it because it was ours. I still remember the nights we'd eat instant noodles together on the couch, laughing over some silly sitcom, imagining the future we'd build once we had more stability. She used to doodle sketches of dream houses in her notebooks, pointing at them and saying, "One day, Daniel, one day we'll make this real." And I believed her. I believed in us. Fast forward almost 10 years, and things looked different on the surface. We had managed to buy a modest home in a quiet neighborhood outside the city. I had climbed higher in my firm, eventually becoming a senior associate, and she had built a steady career designing boutique offices and small cafes. From the outside, people would have said we were doing well, but what they couldn't see was the distance that had crept in. Conversations turned into logistical exchanges: what bills needed to be paid, who was picking up groceries, whether the car insurance was due. The warmth that once filled the space between us had cooled into something routine, something functional, and I told myself it was just the natural progression of marriage. Still, I wanted to fight against that numbness. Our anniversary felt like the perfect chance. I had been setting aside little amounts of money here and there for months. Camille always talked about how she admired her grandmother's bracelet, a delicate piece of jewelry with a single sapphire set in the middle. Her grandmother had passed away years ago, and Camille often said she regretted never asking to keep it as a keepsake. I couldn't find that exact bracelet, of course, but I tracked down a craftsman in a neighboring city who specialized in vintage-inspired jewelry. I asked him to design something similar, a silver chain with a blue stone at its heart, surrounded by subtle floral engravings. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't expensive compared to what some men might buy, but it was thoughtful. It was meant to show that I listened, that I remembered, that I still cared about the little details of her life. The night of our anniversary, I made reservations at a cozy restaurant downtown, one of those places where the lights are dim and the tables are just far enough apart to feel private. Camille's friend, Serena, joined us unexpectedly. Camille explained that Serena had just gone through a breakup and didn't want to be alone that evening. I'll admit I was disappointed, but I didn't argue. I wanted Camille to feel supported, and besides, I told myself the gift would still shine through the night. When dessert arrived, I pulled out the small velvet box, my heart pounding. I slid it across the table to Camille, expecting her eyes to light up the way they once did. She opened it, looked at the bracelet, and her lips tightened into something between a smirk and a frown. "That's it?" she said flatly, her voice tinged with disappointment. For a second, I thought maybe I had misheard, that she was joking. But she closed the box and set it aside like it was nothing more than a trinket from a bargain store. The silence was heavy until Serena leaned forward, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Camille," she said softly, "I'd be grateful if someone gave me something that meaningful." Her words cut deeper than Camille's dismissal, because they validated what I already knew. I had poured thought and love into that gift, and it was cast aside like it meant nothing. I forced a smile to mask the storm brewing inside me, but deep down, something had shifted. That was the beginning of the unraveling, and as much as I tried to push it aside, that moment would replay in my head again and again, leading me to truths I had avoided for far too long. The ride home that night felt like an echo chamber of silence. Camille sat in the passenger seat scrolling on her phone, the glow from the screen lighting her face, while I gripped the wheel tighter than necessary. The streets blurred past, neon signs flickering against the windshield, but all I could hear was the voice inside my head replaying her words. "That's it?" I wanted to believe she was just tired, maybe caught off guard, maybe embarrassed in front of her friend, but the way she had set the box aside, with no trace of appreciation, gnawed at me. It wasn't about the bracelet, it was about what it represented. Years of effort, of listening, of remembering the things she had said in passing, and yet in her eyes, it wasn't enough. When we got home, she went straight upstairs without a word. I stayed behind, sitting on the couch, staring at the gift box still tucked inside my jacket pocket. I didn't even want to look at it, but I pulled it out anyway, opening it slowly. The bracelet gleamed under the dim light, the sapphire catching the faintest glow. To me, it symbolized not just her grandmother's memory, but also a promise I had made to myself long ago, to never stop trying, to always show her that she mattered. But as I sat there, I realized that promise had been one-sided for a long time. The next morning, things carried on as though nothing had happened. Camille moved through the house, making coffee, answering emails, humming to herself. She didn't mention the gift, she didn't mention Serena's comment, and I didn't bring it up either, because I wasn't sure I wanted to hear what she might say. Instead, I buried myself in work, throwing myself into endless spreadsheets and client calls, trying to drown out the ache in my chest. But it was impossible to ignore the growing sense that something had shifted permanently. It was a week later when the first crack in my denial showed itself. I had come home early from the office, surprising Camille. She was sitting in the living room with Serena, the two of them laughing over something on the television. For a moment, the sight warmed me. Camille's laughter had become so rare in our home that I found myself pausing at the doorway just to take it in. But then, as Serena turned to grab her glass of water, I saw Camille's face shift. The smile dropped, her eyes dulled, and she looked almost bored, as if the happiness she wore was just a mask. When she noticed me standing there, she forced another smile, this one hollow. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That night, lying in bed, I turned over the memory of her expression again and again. I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't just dissatisfied with a gift. She was dissatisfied with me, maybe even with the life we had built. And once that thought lodged itself in my mind, I couldn't dislodge it. I started paying more attention to the details. The way she lingered on her phone late at night, turning the screen away when I shifted in bed. The way she dressed a little more carefully when she went out with Serena, putting on lipstick even if they were just running errands. The way she dismissed the small gestures I made, offering to cook dinner, leaving notes in her bag, without so much as a thank you. At first, I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that I was being insecure, but the signs piled up, one after another, until they were impossible to ignore. One evening, I decided to confront her in the most indirect way I could manage. We were eating dinner, and I asked casually, "Do you ever think about the old days? Back when we were just starting out?" She looked at me with a faint smile, but there was no warmth in it. "That was a long time ago, Daniel," she said. "We've grown since then. Things change." "Do they have to?" I asked before I could stop myself. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth, and she tilted her head at me as though I were speaking another language. "Of course they do. People don't stay the same forever." Then she went back to eating, leaving the conversation hanging in the air like smoke. That night, I barely slept. Her words confirmed what I had feared. She wasn't just discontent with a bracelet. She was discontent with us, with me. The realization struck me harder than I wanted to admit, and it left me wondering how long she had felt that way. The following weekend, I went to visit my brother Ethan. We sat on his back porch drinking cheap beer, watching his kids play in the yard. He asked me how things were going, and for the first time, I let some of the truth slip. "Camille didn't like the anniversary gift I gave her," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "She barely even looked at it." Ethan frowned, leaning back in his chair. "What did you get her?" "A bracelet, something that reminded her of her grandmother. I thought she'd love it." "And she didn't?" I shook my head, staring at the bottle in my hand. She said, "That's it?" Ethan let out a low whistle. "That's cold, man. Real cold." "You put your heart into that, I can tell." I didn't answer, but the knot in my chest loosened slightly just hearing him say it. Someone else had confirmed what I already knew deep down, that I wasn't crazy, that my effort had value. But instead of comfort, it filled me with a deeper sadness. Because if Ethan could see it, why couldn't Camille? Driving home that evening, I realized something important. This wasn't just about one night, one gift, or one careless comment. This was about a growing divide that had been widening for years. And now, for the first time, I wasn't sure it could be bridged. The days following my conversation with Ethan weighed heavily on me. His words, though supportive, rang in my ears as both validation and warning. "That's cold, man. Real cold." He hadn't sugarcoated it, hadn't tried to justify Camille's reaction, and while that honesty meant a lot to me, it also made the truth unavoidable. I could no longer hide behind excuses or rationalizations. Something fundamental between Camille and me had broken, and pretending otherwise only deepened the ache in my chest. Still, part of me clung to the memory of who she used to be, the girl who had laughed with me over instant noodles and dreamed about a little house filled with love. That girl seemed so far away now, but I wasn't ready to believe she was gone forever. In an effort to bridge the growing gap, I started making small gestures. I cooked her favorite pasta on a Tuesday night, hoping the scent of garlic and basil would spark a memory of better times. She ate quietly, scrolling through her phone between bites, barely glancing at me. I suggested we go for a walk after dinner like we used to, but she said she was tired and disappeared into the bedroom. I even tried surprising her with tickets to an art exhibit she had once mentioned wanting to see, but when I handed them to her, she sighed and said, "I don't really have the energy for that right now, Daniel." Each attempt felt like throwing pebbles into a well, waiting for a splash that never came. What struck me most was how different she seemed when Serena was around. Whenever her friend visited, Camille transformed. She became animated, chatty, even playful at times. They would sit together on the couch, sharing stories and inside jokes, while I busied myself in the kitchen or retreated to my office upstairs. At first, I told myself it was good for her to have a friend, someone to confide in. But gradually, I started to wonder if Camille's happiness only surfaced when I wasn't part of the picture. That thought gnawed at me, and once it settled in, I couldn't stop noticing the patterns. One evening, as I passed by the living room, I overheard Serena saying softly, "You deserve to be cherished, Camille. Don't settle for less." My footsteps froze. I stood there, just out of sight, my heart hammering. Camille didn't respond immediately, but after a long pause, I heard her murmur, "Sometimes I wonder if we just grew in different directions." The words cut me like glass. I walked away before I could hear more, my stomach twisting with dread. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had already decided to leave me in her heart, even if she hadn't said the words out loud. At work, I found it harder and harder to focus. I'd catch myself rereading the same email 3 times, unable to process the words. My colleagues noticed the change. One even asked if I was all right. I brushed it off, saying I was just dealing with deadlines. But the truth was, I felt like I was living in 2 worlds, one where I pretended everything was fine, and another where I couldn't escape the slow crumbling of my marriage. My boss called me into his office one afternoon, pointing out the decline in my performance. "Daniel, you've always been reliable. If something's going on, take some time. Sort it out," he said. I nodded, but I knew time off wouldn't fix the problem. The problem wasn't me being tired. The problem was at home. One Saturday, in a desperate attempt to reconnect, I suggested we spend the day together without distractions. "Let's go for a drive," I said over breakfast. "We used to love that. Just pick a direction and go." Camille looked at me as though I'd suggested something absurd. "Daniel, I've got too much work to catch up on. I can't just run off on a whim." She returned to her laptop, leaving me sitting there with half a cup of coffee and a hollow feeling in my chest. I ended up driving alone that afternoon, winding through back roads, the radio humming low in the background. It was peaceful, but also lonely. I kept glancing at the empty seat beside me, remembering all the times she had once filled it with laughter, singing along to songs slightly off-key, pointing out silly billboards on the highway. The silence was deafening. That night, Ethan called to check in. I told him about the drive, about how Camille had brushed me off again. He was quiet for a long time before saying, "Dan, I think you need to ask yourself a hard question. Are you holding on to who she was or who she is now?" His words struck me because I realized I hadn't really distinguished between the two. I had been clinging desperately to the memory of the woman I fell in love with, hoping she would resurface if I just tried hard enough. But what if she was gone? What if she had changed into someone I didn't recognize anymore? The following week, Camille came home later than usual. She said she had been out with Serena, helping her look at new apartments since Serena was planning to move. Something about her explanation felt rehearsed, though I had no proof otherwise. I nodded, pretending to accept it, but inside doubt festered. For the first time in our marriage, I began to question her honesty. The thought terrified me. I had always trusted Camille completely, never once doubted her loyalty. But now, with the way she dismissed me, the way she seemed more alive around Serena than around me, I couldn't shake the suspicion that she was hiding something. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I watched. I noticed how she guarded her phone more closely, how she stepped outside to take calls instead of answering them in front of me, how she seemed restless even when sitting still. I wanted to believe it was stress, maybe a rough patch we could overcome, but deep down I knew these were warning signs. Red flags I had ignored for too long were now waving right in front of my face. One night, after she fell asleep, I sat at the edge of the bed staring at her, my mind torn between love and suspicion. I still saw traces of the woman I had married, the one who had once dreamed with me, but those traces were faint, almost like shadows. And as I sat there, I realized with a sinking heart that the woman beside me might not only be unhappy, she might already be imagining a life without me. The following weeks felt like a strange limbo. Camille and I moved through the same house like polite strangers, sharing space but not connection. We spoke about groceries, bills, and chores, but never about the things that truly mattered. The anniversary gift had become a ghost lingering in the background, unspoken but ever present, haunting every exchange between us. I tried to push it aside, but the weight of her words, "That's it?" still echoed in my head, a constant reminder that what I offered her wasn't enough in her eyes. And with every passing day, that gap seemed to widen, drawing me further into the realization that our marriage was teetering on a fragile edge. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I decided to stop by a small bakery near our neighborhood. They made Camille's favorite almond tarts, the kind she used to rave about when we were younger. I thought maybe, just maybe, a small gesture could break through the walls she had built. When I walked through the door and handed her the box, her reaction was tepid at best. She smiled faintly, murmured, "Thanks," and set it aside on the counter without even opening it. Later that night, I found the tarts untouched, the box exactly where I had left it. That tiny rejection hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't about the pastry, it was about the lack of care, the absence of even the smallest acknowledgement that I was trying. Around this time, I noticed Camille's mood lifting only when Serena was involved. They started spending more evenings together, going out for dinners, or supposedly working on design projects. I wanted to believe it was innocent, that Serena was just a friend giving her companionship, but the unease in my gut told me something more was at play. I overheard snippets of their conversations once in a while, phrases like, "You have to do what's right for you," or "Don't let anyone hold you back." These weren't just the words of comfort. They were seeds being planted, reinforcing Camille's discontent with me. The contrast between how Camille treated Serena and how she treated me was becoming impossible to ignore. One Saturday morning, Serena dropped by with coffee. Camille lit up the moment she walked in, her laughter ringing through the house as if a switch had been flipped. They sat together at the dining table, their heads close, voices animated, while I cleaned up the kitchen in silence. At one point, Serena glanced in my direction, her eyes soft with something that looked like pity. That look pierced me deeper than Camille's indifference because it confirmed what I feared. They had talked about me. I was no longer just the husband in the background. I was the subject of their quiet judgments. Later that day, after Serena left, I asked Camille if she was happy. It was a simple question, but it carried the weight of everything I hadn't said aloud. She froze for a moment before replying, "Of course I'm happy. Why wouldn't I be?" Her tone was defensive, almost dismissive, and I didn't push further. But inside, I knew the truth. Happiness doesn't need defending. If she truly was content, she wouldn't have answered that way. The tension seeped into every corner of our home. Meals were quiet, nights felt colder, and even the way she avoided my gaze spoke volumes. I started staying later at work, not because I had to, but because it was easier than being in a house where I felt invisible. My coworkers began noticing my exhaustion, but no one pressed too hard. I think they could sense there was something broken behind my tired smile. It was during this period that Ethan invited me over again. His wife, Lauren, made a point to pull me aside while Ethan was grilling outside. She looked at me with concern and asked, "Daniel, is everything okay between you and Camille? You don't seem like yourself." I hesitated, but eventually I admitted, "I don't think she loves me anymore. At least, not the way she used to." Lauren's expression softened. "People grow, yes, but love shouldn't feel like a burden. You deserve someone who sees your efforts, not dismisses them." Her words stayed with me long after I left their house. Back at home, I began to notice Camille's subtle disdain more clearly. When I spoke, she often sighed before responding, as though even listening to me was an effort. When I tried to sit close on the couch, she shifted slightly away. Even small things, like forgetting to tell me about plans she had already made, spoke of a lack of consideration that cut me deeper each time. The most painful part wasn't her words or actions, but the way she simply didn't seem to care how they affected me. One night, unable to sleep, I sat in the living room staring at the bracelet still tucked inside its velvet box. I had hidden it away in a drawer after that disastrous dinner, but something drew me back to it. Holding it in my hand, I thought about the hours I had spent planning, the money I had saved, the meaning I had attached to that piece of jewelry. It should have been a symbol of love, but now it felt like a monument to rejection. And as I stared at it, I realized I had been holding on to more than just a bracelet. I had been holding on to a version of Camille that no longer existed. The next morning, I found myself studying her over breakfast. She was scrolling through her phone, sipping coffee absent-mindedly, her face lit by the screen. I tried to imagine what was going through her mind, what version of me she saw when she looked in my direction. Did she see the man who had once made her laugh until her sides hurt? Or did she see a weight dragging her down, someone she had already outgrown? That thought chilled me. By this point, even small exchanges became loaded with unspoken tension. When I asked her if she wanted to join me for a walk, she said she had other things to do. When I suggested we cook dinner together, she said she wasn't in the mood. Each rejection wasn't just about the activity. It was about the refusal to engage, to connect, to meet me halfway. And slowly, I began to accept that no matter what I did, it would never be enough. As much as it hurt, that realization was necessary. It was the beginning of a shift within me, a quiet acknowledgement that I couldn't keep pouring myself into something that was draining me. I didn't know yet what decision I would make, but deep down, I understood that I had reached a turning point. The moment I admitted to myself that nothing I did would ever be enough, everything I had been trying to suppress began to surface. It was like removing a dam that had been straining against the pressure of water for too long. Once it cracked, the flood was unstoppable. I started noticing things I had brushed aside before. Small behaviors that suddenly loomed larger when viewed through the lens of doubt and disappointment. Camille's dismissive tone, her subtle irritation when I asked her questions, the way she spent more and more time outside the house, all of it painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. One evening I came home earlier than usual. My firm had cut a meeting short, and I thought maybe I'd surprise Camille with takeout from her favorite Thai restaurant. As I walked into the house, I heard voices from the living room. Camille and Serena were sitting close together on the couch, their heads bent over a phone. I lingered in the hallway for a moment, unseen, and caught fragments of their conversation. You shouldn't have to settle for that, Serena was saying, her voice low but firm. I know, Camille replied, sighing, but change is scary. I don't know if I'm ready. I felt my chest tighten, my grip on the takeout bags trembling. They didn't notice me until I stepped fully into the room, forcing a smile. Camille's face flickered with something unreadable. Surprise. Maybe guilt. But she quickly masked it with a casual greeting. You're home early, she said. Yeah, meeting ended sooner than expected, I replied, setting the food on the kitchen counter. My voice sounded steady, but inside I was unraveling. Change? Settle for that. The words bounced around in my head, cutting deeper with each repetition. They weren't just talking about life in general. They were talking about me. About us. Dinner that night was strained. Camille barely touched her food, claiming she wasn't hungry. Serena left shortly after, giving me that same pitying look as she walked past. I sat at the table long after Camille had gone upstairs, staring at the untouched pad thai. The aroma that once would have filled our home with warmth now clinging to the air like a bitter reminder of how far we had drifted. Over the next few days, the tension grew unbearable. I found myself second-guessing every interaction, every word that passed between us. I started to wonder if Camille even noticed the effort I was making anymore, or if she had already checked out completely. The silence between us wasn't just quiet, it was loaded, heavy, a constant reminder of what wasn't being said. The breaking point came one Saturday afternoon. I suggested we spend some time together in the garden. It wasn't much, just pulling weeds and trimming the hedges, but I thought maybe the simple act of working side by side could spark something. Camille agreed half-heartedly, but after 15 minutes, she put down the shears and said, I don't know why we're doing this. It's pointless. I froze, the words stinging more than they should have. What do you mean pointless? I asked. She wiped her hands on her jeans, avoiding my eyes. I mean, we're not happy, Daniel. Pretending like these little activities will fix things. It's not going to change anything. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened, and I felt like the ground beneath me was giving way. So that's it? I managed to say finally. You've already decided it's hopeless? Camille looked at me then, her eyes weary. I don't know what I've decided. I just know I don't feel the way I used to. Her honesty, as painful as it was, confirmed what I had been dreading. She wasn't just discontent, she was detached. The love that had once bound us together had eroded, and no amount of small gestures could rebuild it. I stood there in the garden, the sun casting long shadows across the grass, and felt the weight of years collapsing in on me. That night, I sat in the living room with the lights off, staring out the window at the quiet street. I replayed her words over and over. I don't feel the way I used to. It was both a confession and a sentence, a truth I had suspected but hadn't been ready to face. Now I couldn't unhear it. I couldn't unsee the reality that my marriage was slipping through my fingers, and I was powerless to stop it. In the days that followed, I found myself withdrawing. I no longer tried to surprise her with little gestures. I stopped suggesting outings or conversations that I knew she would dismiss. Instead, I focused on myself. On going to the gym after work, on reconnecting with Ethan and Lauren, on spending time with colleagues outside the office. It wasn't a conscious decision to detach, it was survival. I couldn't keep setting myself on fire to keep her warm, not when she had already turned away from the flames. But even as I pulled back, the pain didn't lessen. If anything, it grew sharper. Watching her move through the house like a stranger, knowing that my presence no longer brought her joy, was a kind of grief I hadn't expected. It wasn't just the loss of love. It was the loss of the future I had imagined, the one we had once dreamed of together. One evening, as I sat on the porch nursing a beer, Ethan called again. He asked how things were, and for the first time, I told him everything. The gift, her reaction, Serena's influence, the words she had said in the garden. He listened quietly, letting me pour it all out until my voice broke. Finally, he said, Dan, I know this hurts, but you need to think about what you deserve. You've been giving everything, and she's been giving nothing. At some point, you have to stop bleeding for someone who won't even notice. His words struck deep, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. I had been clinging to the idea of who Camille used to be, blind to the reality of who she had become, and as much as it hurt to admit, I knew Ethan was right. I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for a love that no longer existed. That realization didn't mean I was ready to walk away, not yet. But it planted a seed, one that would grow stronger with each passing day. For the first time, I began to imagine a life beyond this marriage. A life where I wasn't constantly made to feel small, unseen, and unworthy. And though the thought terrified me, it also carried a glimmer of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Once the seed of doubt had taken root in my mind, it grew relentlessly. I could no longer look at Camille without seeing the cracks between us, the invisible walls she had built over the years, and the disdain she tried but often failed to hide. It wasn't just her words that haunted me now. It was her silences, her glances at her phone when we sat together, her sighs that seemed heavier whenever I entered the room. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid, but the truth was too persistent to ignore. She was slipping away, and it wasn't by accident. The first truly undeniable moment came late one evening. Camille had told me she was meeting Serena for dinner after work. Normally, I wouldn't have thought much of it, but something about her tone when she mentioned it raised alarms. She didn't look at me when she said it, and her voice was clipped, almost rehearsed. I tried to focus on my own evening, caught up on work, watched a little television, but as the hours dragged by, unease coiled in my stomach. By the time the clock struck midnight, she still wasn't home. I paced the living room, staring at the front door as though I could will it to open. When she finally stumbled in at 12:30, her hair slightly disheveled and the faint smell of alcohol lingering around her, I didn't even need to ask. "Long night?" I said quietly. She paused, her eyes darting to mine before quickly looking away. "Yeah, Serena and I lost track of time. We were catching up." "Until after midnight?" Her jaw tightened, irritation flashing across her face. "Do I need to report every minute of my evening to you?" The defensiveness cut me deeper than the lateness. I wanted to believe her, but the seed of doubt had already grown into something thorny and unmanageable. Instead of pressing further, I just nodded and let her retreat upstairs. That night, I lay awake listening to the sound of her shower running, wondering if the woman I once trusted completely had turned into someone I barely knew. Over the following weeks, the distance widened. Camille spent more evenings with friends, though she rarely mentioned Serena by name anymore. I noticed her phone was always glued to her hand, face turned away from me. If I happened to walk into the room, she'd lock the screen with a speed that made my stomach clench. I told myself maybe it was just privacy, maybe she was venting to Serena about our marriage. But the gnawing suspicion that there was someone else crept into every thought I had. One Saturday, I decided to confront it indirectly. I suggested we go on a weekend trip together, just the two of us. Something to reset, to reconnect. Camille didn't even let me finish before shaking her head. "I don't think that's a good idea," she said. "Why not? We haven't had time together in months. Don't you think we could use it?" Her eyes narrowed and she crossed her arms. "What I think is that you're trying to put a bandage on a wound that won't heal. A trip won't fix us, Daniel. It's just another distraction." Her rejection stung, but it also confirmed something I hadn't wanted to admit. She didn't want to fix us. She had already checked out, already turned her heart towards something or someone else. The following week brought another blow. I was in the grocery store picking up a few things when I saw Serena in the same aisle. She spotted me before I could turn away, and for a brief second I thought she might pretend not to know me. Instead, she gave me a tight smile, but there was pity in her eyes, and it enraged me. "How are things?" she asked, her tone careful, measured. "Fine," I replied curtly, reaching for a box of cereal I didn't even need. She hesitated before adding, "Daniel, I hope you know you deserve to be happy. Don't let anyone make you feel like less than you are." Her words struck me like a slap. On the surface, they seemed kind, even supportive. But coming from her, the one who had been whispering poison into Camille's ear for months, it felt like mockery. I didn't respond, just pushed my cart away before I said something I'd regret. But the encounter left me seething. If even Serena, Camille's confidant, was pitying me, what did that say about how my wife spoke about me when I wasn't around? That night, when Camille came home later than usual, I finally broke. "Are you seeing someone else?" I asked bluntly, the words spilling out before I could stop them. She froze, her purse halfway onto the counter. "What? You heard me, are you?" "Because if you're not, then explain the late nights, the secrecy, the way you can't even look me in the eye anymore." Her face twisted in anger. "I can't believe you're accusing me of that," she snapped. "Do you have any idea how insulting that is? What else am I supposed to think?" My voice cracked under the weight of weeks of doubt and pain. "You treat me like I'm invisible, like nothing I do matters, and you spend all your time with people who make me out to be the villain. If it's not another man, then what is it, Camille? Because this isn't just about being unhappy. You're somewhere else entirely." Her eyes glistened, but not with sorrow, with fury. "You don't get it, do you? You're so desperate to be the perfect husband that you never stop to see how suffocating it is. I don't need grand gestures or trips. I need space. I need freedom. And maybe, just maybe, I need someone who actually understands me." The last words landed like a dagger. She hadn't admitted to an affair outright, but she hadn't denied it either. Instead, she had laid bare what I had feared most, that I wasn't what she wanted anymore, and maybe I never had been. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the darkened living room, replaying every moment of our marriage like a film reel. The laughter, the promises, the vows we had once spoken, it all seemed like a cruel joke now. And for the first time, I realized that the life I had built around Camille wasn't just fragile, it was already in ruins. The next morning, I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. Tired eyes, slumped shoulders, a hollow expression. This wasn't who I was supposed to be. This wasn't who I wanted to be. Something inside me shifted then. Not yet a decision, but the undeniable beginning of one. I couldn't keep living like this, trapped in the shadow of a love that had turned cold. And though I didn't know exactly what I would do, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. Something had to change, and soon. In the days following our explosive confrontation, the silence in the house became unbearable. Camille moved around me like I was just another piece of furniture, present but irrelevant. Meals were no longer shared, conversations reduced to logistical necessities, and any attempt I made to bridge the gap was met with walls higher than before. I found myself spiraling, replaying her words in my head, hearing the venom laced in her tone when she said she needed someone who understood her. It was the closest thing to an admission, and it carved a wound I couldn't stitch up on my own. For the first time, I realized I couldn't keep this all bottled inside. I needed someone outside of my own thoughts, someone who wouldn't sugarcoat things or make excuses for her. I reached out to Ethan one evening after work. My voice cracked when I asked if he could meet me for a drink. He didn't hesitate. Within an hour, we were sitting across from each other at a small bar downtown, the kind of place dimly lit enough to make your problems feel just a little less visible. Ethan ordered us both a round, and before the glasses even touched the table, I spilled everything. The late nights, the secrecy, her dismissiveness, the way she talked about needing freedom. I admitted my fears about another man, though I couldn't bring myself to say the words affair out loud. Ethan listened quietly, his brow furrowed, his hand gripping his glass but not drinking. When I finally ran out of words, he leaned forward. "Dan, I'm going to be straight with you. This doesn't sound like a marriage anymore. This sounds like you living in someone else's story, where you're cast as the supporting character. And that's not who you are." I tried to smile, but the weight in my chest didn't budge. I keep wondering if I should have done more. If maybe all those gestures, all that effort, wasn't what she needed. Ethan shook his head. "No. You've been bending over backward to meet her halfway, and she's not even stepping out the door. That's not on you, that's her choice. And if she's already talking about needing someone else, then maybe she's already made her decision, and you're the only one who hasn't caught up yet." The bluntness stung, but it also cracked something open inside me. For weeks, maybe months, I'd been gaslighting myself into thinking I wasn't enough, that my failures had caused the rift. But hearing Ethan validate what I felt, that I wasn't crazy, that Camille had been pulling away long before I noticed, brought a painful clarity. In the following days, I also spoke with Lauren. She had noticed my change in demeanor long before I confessed what was going on. Over coffee in her kitchen, with her kids playing in the next room, she said softly, "Dan, I know you've been trying, but there comes a point where trying harder just breaks you. Camille isn't the woman she used to be, and you can't fix someone who doesn't want to be fixed." Her words reminded me of the early days, when Camille used to join Lauren and me for barbecues and laugh so easily, when friendship circles overlapped and felt seamless. That version of Camille was gone, and in her place stood someone hardened, dismissive, and unreachable. Lauren's empathy brought me to tears that day, and though I tried to hold it back, she just squeezed my hand and said, "It's okay to let go, Dan. It doesn't mean you failed. It means you're choosing yourself for once." The validation didn't end there. My parents, who had been quietly concerned, finally confronted me during Sunday dinner. My mother, with her gentle eyes, asked, "Are you happy, son?" I wanted to lie, to plaster on the same smile I had worn for weeks, but I couldn't. The truth spilled out in fragments, and my father, usually reserved, spoke with a firmness I rarely heard from him. "You've given that marriage everything. If she doesn't see it, if she doesn't value it, then staying will only destroy you. Sometimes walking away isn't weakness, it's the bravest thing you can do." Hearing it from them, people who had always taught me to persevere, to fight for love and commitment, was like permission I didn't realize I'd been waiting for. They weren't telling me to quit. They were telling me to stop sacrificing myself for someone unwilling to meet me halfway. But perhaps the most jarring validation came unexpectedly. One evening, I bumped into Serena again, this time outside a coffee shop. She looked startled when she saw me, as if caught in the act of betraying a secret. Before I could turn away, she approached me. "Daniel, can we talk?" she asked cautiously. I wanted to refuse, to avoid another layer of manipulation, but something in her tone suggested she wasn't here to gloat. We sat outside, and she surprised me by sighing deeply. "I know you don't like me, and I can't blame you. But I need to tell you something. Camille. She's been confiding in me for months, and the truth is, she's not confused anymore. She's already chosen a different path. She just hasn't had the courage to tell you." The words hit like a wrecking ball, even though they only confirmed what I'd already suspected. "So there is someone else?" I asked, my voice low, bracing for the blow. Serena hesitated, then nodded slightly. "I don't know the details, but she talks about freedom, about wanting something new. And Dan, I think you deserve to know that it's not about you not trying hard enough. It's about her wanting out." For once, there was no smugness in Serena's voice, no pity, just blunt truth. I left the coffee shop in a haze, my body numb, my thoughts racing. Every piece of validation I'd received from Ethan, from Lauren, from my parents, now solidified into undeniable reality. This marriage wasn't salvageable. That night, I sat alone in the quiet of the house, staring at the empty seat across from me at the table. For months, I had been clinging to the hope that something would shift, that Camille would return to me, that my love would be enough to pull us through. But with the chorus of voices around me, with the stark confirmation that she had already chosen to leave in her heart, I realized that hope was no longer saving me, it was killing me. And as painful as that realization was, it also brought with it a strange clarity. I could no longer deny what everyone else saw so clearly. My marriage was over, even if the paperwork hadn't been signed, even if the words hadn't been officially spoken. And the next step would be mine to take, whether I was ready or not. The days following Serena's blunt admission were some of the darkest of my life. It was as if a curtain had been pulled back, and I could finally see the stage for what it was. A crumbling set with broken props, the actors long gone, and me still standing there pretending the play was continuing. Every interaction with Camille carried the weight of finality, even though the words hadn't yet been spoken. She moved through the house like a guest who had overstayed her welcome, her suitcase of emotions already packed, waiting only for the right moment to step out the door. One night, after she had once again claimed she was going out with friends, I sat in our bedroom staring at the anniversary gift she had dismissed so coldly weeks earlier. The silver bracelet lay untouched in its box on my nightstand. I picked it up and turned it over in my hands, the engraving to many more years together, mocking me with its naive optimism. That inscription, once meant as a promise, now felt like a cruel joke. My throat tightened and tears blurred my vision. I had poured so much of myself into this marriage, and yet here I was, alone in a room that used to feel like a sanctuary but now felt like a tomb. The spiral deepened that weekend. Camille came home late again, and I decided I couldn't stay silent anymore. "Camille, we need to talk," I said as soon as she walked through the door. She sighed, already exasperated. "Not tonight, Daniel. I'm tired." "No," I insisted, my voice cracking but firm. "We're going to talk, because I can't live like this anymore." Her eyes met mine then, and there was no love in them, no softness, Only exhaustion, maybe annoyance. "Fine," she said, dropping her bag on the counter. "Say what you need to say." I swallowed hard. "Are you seeing someone else?" The silence stretched, heavier than any words she could have spoken. She didn't answer, not with words, but her expression told me enough. She wasn't angry at the question. She wasn't offended. She was simply indifferent, as if the truth didn't matter anymore. And that indifference cut deeper than any confession could have. Finally she spoke, her tone flat. "Does it matter? You and I both know this isn't working. I don't love you the way I used to. Maybe I don't love you at all anymore." The words shattered me. I felt like the air had been punched out of my lungs. I wanted to scream, to beg her to take it back, but I couldn't move. I just stood there, numb, the reality crashing down around me. That was the moment I realized we had reached the end. It wasn't a fight or an argument. It was the absence of one. It was the cold, unfeeling truth that nothing remained to fight for. That night I didn't sleep. I wandered the house in silence, replaying every memory, every laugh, every touch that had once felt like home. The echoes of what we used to be haunted me, but they also highlighted the stark emptiness of what we had become. I sat on the couch until sunrise, staring at the front door, half expecting her to walk out and never return. In my heart, I knew it was only a matter of time. The next morning, I found myself driving without direction, my hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. I ended up at a park we used to visit early in our marriage, a quiet place with a small pond and benches shaded by old oak trees. I sat there for hours, watching families walk by, couples holding hands, children laughing as they fed ducks. It was a cruel reminder of the life I had envisioned for us, a life that would never come to be. For the first time, I allowed myself to truly grieve, not just for the marriage, but for the man I had been when I entered it. I grieved for the hopeful husband who believed love could conquer everything, for the man who spent hours planning thoughtful surprises, for the partner who believed loyalty and effort would always be enough. That man had been eroded piece by piece, replaced by someone hollow, someone clinging to the remnants of a love that no longer existed. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from Ethan, checking in. "How are you holding up?" My fingers hovered over the keyboard before I finally typed back, "I think it's over. I don't know what to do next." He responded almost immediately. "Then it's time to choose yourself, brother. Stop waiting for her to save what she doesn't care about. Save yourself instead." His words pierced through the fog of despair. They echoed what everyone else had been trying to tell me, but now, in the aftermath of Camille's cold admission, they finally made sense. Rock bottom wasn't just the moment of realizing my marriage was broken. It was the moment I realized I had lost myself trying to hold it together. And there was no lower place to fall than that. That evening, Camille returned home, and I watched her move through the house without acknowledgement, like I wasn't even there. For the first time, I didn't feel desperate to stop her, to force her to look at me, to beg for scraps of affection. I just felt empty. But in that emptiness was a strange clarity. I had nothing left to lose because she had already taken everything. As I lay in bed alone that night, I whispered to myself, "This isn't who I am. This isn't who I want to be." It was the smallest spark, but it was real. And I knew, deep down, that the next step had to come from me. The gift she rejected, the cold stares, the late nights, the indifference, it had all led to this, rock bottom. The place where hope died, but also the place where something new could be born. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't waiting for Camille to decide my fate. I was preparing to decide it for myself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.